PA have finally agreed to testing protocols ahead of training camp. Daily COVID-19 testing will be required for the first 2 weeks of training camp. After 2 weeks, if the positive test rate is below 5% for an individual team, the league will scale back to testing every other day. The Texans and Chiefs rookies reported Monday, and the full squad reporting date for most teams is July 28th. The NFL also offering the NFLPA this on Monday to play 0 preseason games this summer. That, according to our Adam Schefter, you see his tweet right there. Now, let's keep in mind, Dr. Anthony Fauci, we all know the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, said last month football teams would need to emulate plans by the NBA and MLS, a bubble situation, or consider not having a season at all in 2020. Max, I'm going to start with you on this one. There's more players in football than any of these major sports. There is more contact in football. Do you honestly believe we are going to have a season?
I don't, and I never did. I don't think they'll complete the season. I think the odds are extremely low, and I said that since the outbreak of this pandemic, really. Look, let's start. You just mentioned it. There are more players in football, not fewer like in basketball, and I was cautiously optimistic that the NBA could actually crown a champion this year. But guys, that's mostly because they were almost done with their regular season. Even for the local TV money to kick in, they only had to play 6 or 7 more games, something like that. Then they get all their money, and then they can go right to the playoffs. They had it in a bubble. And think about how Adam Silver approached this. Let's take the most conservative approach to this. Let's the most restrictive approach. It's going to be in a bubble. Everyone gets tested multiple times, et cetera, et cetera. They suspended their season in March, by the way, when there were, 5 or 10,000 cases daily. Now it's come down from its peak of 70,000 a couple days ago. It's down to like 55,000. We're 10 times the number of cases daily now that we were then. So if you suspend it then, and it's 10 times worse now, how are you going to start up a season now? But the NBA shut everything down, said, okay, with relatively few people, once we can get our hands on enough tests where testing is more widely available, we're not taking it away from people who really need it, we can contact trace and all those things, we'll set up a bubble, strict protocols, you can't bring your family, it's only a couple months because we're almost done with our season. That approach, guys, leaves me cautiously optimistic that they can finish the whole thing. But the NFL seems to be either they have no plan or they're not communicating it well at all, because the players seem to think, as was evidenced from their tweets over the weekend, that they have no plan, or at least it hasn't been communicated. And what it seems to me is that the NFL, instead of taking the most conservative approach, and then if things get better, you can loosen it a little bit, instead, they're taking the most kind of liberal approach, for lack of a better word, in the sense that they want things as close to normal as possible. But that ain't going to work, and now it's too late, really, to set up a bubble. Notice the NFL has canceled everything. The draft was done with social distancing, over video conference. As you saw here on ESPN, the Hall of Fame game canceled. Now the preseason canceled. They're not, guys, if they start their season, I see virtually no way they're going to finish it. Even baseball, who couldn't work out a deal, said, okay, we'll do 60 games. 60 games. I don't know if they're going to finish their season, but baseball is kind of a socially distant sport to begin with, and they already cut their season in almost a third. The NFL wants business as usual. All the regular season games, no central location, no bubble. They just now eliminated preseason games. This does not seem to be a realistic approach, and the NFL from the beginning has had a starry-eyed approach to this. Not realistic, not conservative enough. I think it's actually too late now to reverse everything. I don't see how they finish their season if they start it.
Well, Max, you, like a lot of people, have been doubting Roger Goodell in the NFL from day one. They talked about free agency. We can't do it. What's it going to look like when guys are getting all this big money amidst the pandemic? Guess what? The NFL went ahead and did it. Oh, what about the draft? It was going to be in Vegas, and now they had to change that and do it virtually. Is it going to feel the same? Is it going to be different? The NFL can't pull it off. Check mark, they did that. I think the one thing that Roger Goodell has shown us, he and the 31 guys plus Green Bay that he works for, the NFL, they are willing to push the limits and do what it takes to have an NFL season. Ultimately, this comes down to money. Okay, you have billionaires who own the team and millionaire players who are working for these owners. You talk about, do I believe the NFL is going to have a season? Absolutely, because the players, the employees, 95 to 97% of those players need to go out and play. Okay, they can't hold out. Back in the day when we were talking about the CBA and holding out, the players couldn't do it then. So amidst the pandemic, as long as the testing procedures are there, which they agreed upon. We're going to test you every single day for the first 2 weeks. We're going to cut out all meaningless games. You mentioned the preseason, Max. You mentioned the Hall of Fame game. Those are meaningless games from a veteran player standpoint. I give it to you. It's going to hurt the rookies in the back end of the roster. There are going to be some guys who would have probably made the team had they been given an opportunity to play in 2 or 3 preseason games. But overall, the product of the NFL will be fine because the NFL is about star power and about veteran players, and that continuity and consistency will happen throughout the season. But do I think the NFL is going to put their toe to ball with the Chiefs and the Texans on Thursday night? Absolutely, because there's entirely too much money involved. And barring this, Max, here's the only way I'll cave in to your theory. Barring somebody important in the NFL, albeit player, albeit coach, albeit owner, somebody that gets gravely ill and they have to be put in the hospital on a ventilator, that is the only way that the NFL train is stopping, and they are showing us that. They've shown us that from the beginning of the offseason, and they're going to push full steam ahead now.
Well, I mean, what else do you guys expect? Listen. It's the blind leading the blind. Listen, when it comes down to Roger Goodell, nothing surprises me with him. His lack of leadership is poor. I'm glad I just don't have to deal with him. I feel sorry for you, Booger. You're my brother, but I feel sorry that you have to continue to be an NFL analyst and cover Roger Goodell, who's probably the worst commissioner in sports, and I'm over here enjoying the good life, covering the best commissioner in sports and Adam Silver. Like Max said, they don't have a plan in place. And when you see players lashing out, tweeting out, and then you see the NFL on one side saying about, how they're going to, test this way and then test every other day, to me, that raises concerns that they're not putting these players' health as a priority, and I just don't see it happening. If the season do happen to continue or do happen to start up, it's going to be a disaster because they don't have a plan. And they should have learned from the NBA how to communicate association communicating with the NFL, but it doesn't surprise me. They all over the place. Sometimes like how Max is on this show, all over the place and confused. That's how the NFL is
in
right now.
In one place.
Perk.
Stay beating you in the debate, Perk. One place. Look, here's the issue,
yeah, whatever,
guys.
Max. I had to start it off right.
Because there's been such poor leadership in this country among so many irresponsible leaders, people weren't wearing masks for the longest and still continue that in some areas. And as a result, the virus is now raging out of control in this country, unlike the rest of Europe, for example, where we have 10 times the number of daily cases they have in all of Europe, daily at this point. So what happens? Like, how do you control a pandemic? You start social distancing early, we started late. You shut down things early, we started late. And then the duration, the patience you have, as the curve flattens and then hopefully gets crushed, you have to have patience to stay with it. What we've shown is that if there's a little dip, everyone gets very afraid. Okay, great. We're through the woods. We take off the masks. And so what's going to happen, Boog, most likely based on what's already happened in the fall, it seems to me, and according to the prediction of some who would know or who predict these things, what's going to coincide with flu season is a second or third, whatever you want to call it, wave that's much worse than what we have now. How are you going to play a full contact sport involving a couple hundred people when you include support staff in 30 different 16 different places every week? How are you going to do that? I don't see how it's feasible in the middle of a pandemic. But like maybe if you had the best planning possible, maybe, but they apparently have no plan.
It's amazing. Now, Perk, I'll give you this. Adam Silver has been outstanding, but I'm not just going to let you poo-poo on Roger Goodell because for every time everyone says that Roger Goodell can't do something, he gets it done. Now, it may not come across, it may not look like the way you want it to look, Okay, but the NFL gets things done. And Max, to your point, I'm not asking you to be Dr. Fauci. If I wanted a medical director to talk about what's going on in Europe, I'd turn on one of those news channels and listen to Dr. Fauci. We're talking about, can the NFL season, can this season take place? They're going to spend upwards, I saw a report, of $75 million on testing. From a player standpoint, if I'm being tested, and I know the people that I'm going against are being tested, and we're all testing negative, and